He leaned close to her on the balcony, the ocean stretching endlessly beneath them, and smiled like a man who believed he had escaped consequence. "Out here," Thomas Kingston murmured, lifting his champagne glass. "Nothing follows you. No past. No responsibilities." Mia laughed, young and bright, the sound carried away by the wind. The ship cut through the water like a promise. Silent, powerful, untouchable. Then the speakers came alive. A calm voice filled the deck, steady and unmistakably authoritative. "Good evening, passengers. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard." Thomas froze. Not because the announcement interrupted him, but because something in the tone pulled at a memory he didn't want to examine. Precision. Control. A voice that didn't ask for attention, yet commanded it. Mia didn't notice. She was already raising her phone, framing the sunset, capturing proof of a luxury she believed belonged to her. Inside the suite minutes earlier, Thomas had admired himself in the mirror. The tailored suit. The expensive watch. The version of himself that never lost. Outside, the city he left behind faded into distance, along with the woman he believed would never catch up. Laura had always been predictable, dependable, quietly supportive. A presence that blended into the background of his success. Or so he thought. The ship's horn sounded. Deep, resonant, final. The coastline slipped away. Glass balconies shimmered. Music floated through polished corridors. Everywhere Thomas looked, wealth wrapped itself around him like protection. He felt lighter with every step. Until the voice returned. "Please settle in and enjoy the journey," it said. "We'll be departing shortly." This time the name followed. And the illusion shattered. Because the woman Thomas left behind, the one he dismissed, underestimated and replaced, was not waiting at home. She was standing on the bridge. And she was in command of everything that came next. As the ship sailed forward, Thomas remained where he was, smiling too slowly, breathing too shallowly, already trapped in a journey he no longer controlled. And Laura Kingston hadn't said a word to him yet. Thomas Kingston had perfected the art of leaving without appearing to leave anything behind. That morning, his house looked exactly as it always did. Orderly, expensive, calm. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, catching on polished surfaces and framed photographs that told a carefully edited story of success and stability. He moved through it with ease, rolling his suitcase behind him like it belonged to another version of his life. Laura stood near the kitchen island, tying back her hair with the same unhurried focus she brought to everything. She wore no makeup, no jewelry beyond her wedding ring. Practical, grounded, familiar in a way Thomas had come to mistake for stagnation. "You'll call when you arrive?" she asked, not looking up. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "It's just a corporate retreat. Meetings, dinners. Boring stuff." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that trusted without needing proof. "Still, 2 weeks is 2 weeks." He stepped closer, kissed her cheek, breathing in the clean, neutral scent of home. It didn't stir guilt so much as impatience. Predictability had started to feel like a cage, and Thomas believed cages were for people without ambition. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. "I'll be back before you know it," he said, lifting the suitcase. "Don't work too hard." Laura watched him go, unaware that every word he'd spoken had been rehearsed long before that morning. Outside, the world felt different. Brighter. Looser. The car waited at the curb, engine running. Mia Reynolds sat inside, sunglasses on, smile already in place. Youth, excitement, escape. Everything Laura was not, at least in Thomas's mind. "You ready?" Mia asked as he slid into the seat beside her. He nodded, glancing once at the house before the gate closed behind them. More than ready. As the car pulled away, Thomas felt the familiar rush of certainty settle in his chest. He had planned this perfectly. Chosen distance. Chosen silence. Chosen a place where no one would ask questions or expect answers. A luxury ship. Open water. No ties. He leaned back, confident, convinced that control was something you could pack neatly into a suitcase and carry with you. What he didn't realize, couldn't afford to consider, was that some lies don't stay behind. They board with you. The ship made freedom feel effortless. From the moment Thomas stepped aboard, the weight he carried loosened its grip. Crew members greeted him by name, smiles polished and professional. Glass railings gleamed under soft lighting. Music drifted through open spaces designed to make time disappear. Everything about the ship whispered that rules were optional here. Mia leaned into the illusion eagerly. She spun through the suite, laughing as if the space belonged to her, as if this was the life she'd always deserved. Thomas watched her with satisfaction, mistaking her awe for proof that he had chosen correctly. "This place is unreal," she said, tracing her fingers along the marble counter. "No one knows us. No one cares." "That's the point," Thomas replied, pouring champagne. "Out here, nothing follows you." They toasted to escape, to secrecy, to a future that existed only in the moment. From the balcony, the coastline shrank into irrelevance. The horizon stretched wide and forgiving, promising anonymity with every rolling wave. Thomas believed it. He shed his phone first, then his habits. Emails went unanswered. Schedules dissolved. Days blurred into indulgence. Late mornings, long meals, nights soaked in music and laughter. He wore linen instead of suits. Slept past sunrise. Let Mia pull him toward experiences he'd never considered before because they felt reckless enough to prove he was still in control. When the ship's horn sounded, deep and final, Thomas felt something close to triumph. The land he'd left behind. His marriage, his responsibilities, the woman who trusted him, faded with the shore. This was freedom, he told himself. Not consequence-free indulgence, but earned escape. Yet beneath the ease, arrogance took root. He spoke about Laura less carefully now. Dismissive jokes, casual erasures. A life reframed as something small and manageable, left behind by choice rather than betrayal. Mia laughed, encouraged him, reinforced the story he needed to believe. The ship moved smoothly through the water, massive and unstoppable, and Thomas felt mirrored in its confidence. He mistook luxury for invincibility, distance for safety, silence for absolution. He didn't notice how often he checked the intercom when it crackled to life, or how his smile lingered a second too long whenever authority passed nearby. Freedom, after all, feels most convincing right before it fails. And as the ship sailed deeper into open water, Thomas stood at the rail, certain of one thing. Nothing could reach him now. The announcement came just as the sky began to darken. Thomas and Mia stood on the balcony, glasses in hand, watching the last stretch of land dissolve into shadow. The air was warm, heavy with salt and promise. Laughter drifted up from lower decks. Somewhere music swelled and faded. Then the speakers crackled. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." The voice was calm and hurried, neither warm nor distant, simply certain. Thomas felt it before he understood it. A tightening in his chest. A pause that had nothing to do with the words and everything to do with the way they were spoken. "This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard." His fingers curled slightly around the glass. There was something in the cadence that pulled at him, something familiar in its restraint. Not sharp, not performative. A voice that didn't ask to be listened to because it assumed it would be. Mia didn't notice. She was already turning, angling her phone toward the horizon. "This lighting is perfect," she said, smiling for a picture. "Hold still." Thomas forced a smile and leaned closer, but his attention had drifted. The announcement continued. Routine details, directions, reassurances, but he barely heard them. His mind replayed the tone instead, searching for a place to put it. "You're imagining things," he told himself. Plenty of captains sounded like that. Plenty of women spoke with confidence. Meant nothing. The glass felt heavier in his hand. He set it down. "You okay?" Mia asked, glancing at him over her shoulder. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "Just tired. Long day." She shrugged and returned to her screen. "Well, get used to it. We've got 2 weeks of this." 2 weeks. The words echoed unpleasantly. The speakers clicked off. The moment passed. Around them, the ship continued its smooth, deliberate glide forward, unaffected by the small shift inside him. Thomas exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. It was nothing, he decided. Just a voice. Just nerves adjusting to the unfamiliar quiet of open water. Still, as night settled fully and lights bloomed across the decks, he found himself listening more closely each time the intercom stirred, waiting without knowing what for, telling himself it was coincidence, fatigue, imagination. But deep down, beneath the indulgence and confidence, a thin thread of unease had begun to pull tight. And once it had his attention, it refused to let go. Morning arrived gently, as if the ship were trying not to disturb anyone. Sunlight spilled across the dining area, glinting off glass and polished steel. The ocean beyond the windows looked calm, obedient. Thomas sat across from Mia, stirring his coffee without tasting it, the events of the night before replaying in fragments he couldn't quite place. Then the speakers came alive again. "Good morning, passengers." His hand stilled. "This is your captain, Laura Kingston, welcoming you to your first full day at sea." The name landed with precision. Thomas's cup rattled softly against the saucer. Mia looked up, amused. "Wow, that's a strong voice. Sounds like she runs a tight ship." He forced a laugh that felt brittle in his throat. "Yeah, impressive. Laura Kingston. Not similar. Not close. Zach." His heart began to race, logic scrambling to catch up. It had to be coincidence. A shared last name. Common enough first name. The world was full of them. He pushed back from the table and stood. "I'll be right back." Thomas crossed the dining room with measured steps, approaching the nearest crew member. "Excuse me," he said lightly. "The captain, what was her name again?" The attendant smiled, professional and unguarded. "Captain Laura Kingston, sir. First woman to command this vessel. Exceptional record." The room seemed to tilt. "That's remarkable," Thomas managed. He returned to the table slowly, every sound suddenly too loud. Mia was scrolling through her phone, already bored with breakfast. "You look pale," she said. "Seasick." "Coffee," he replied. "Too strong." But the truth pressed in from all sides. Laura. His Laura. The woman he had left standing in their kitchen, trusting and unaware. The woman he'd dismissed as predictable, as background. The woman who had never raised her voice, and never needed to. Fragments surfaced now. Late nights she spent studying. Books he never opened. Conversations he'd half listened to while checking his phone. He had laughed then. Now, the laughter echoed hollowly in his chest. Somewhere above them, Laura Kingston stood on the bridge, commanding steel and sea with the same quiet certainty she'd always carried. She hadn't chased him. Hadn't warned him. She had simply arrived. Thomas sat back down, his appetite gone, the illusion finally stripped away. This wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. And there was nowhere left to hide. Laura Kingston had never announced her plans. She learned early that dreams spoken too loudly invited dismissal. Thomas had been generous with his opinions. What made sense, what was practical, what was too late. So she learned to work quietly, building something solid where no one thought to look. While Thomas traveled for business, Laura stayed up late at the kitchen table, manuals spread beside a cooling mug of tea. Maritime law, navigation systems, weather patterns, courses taken online then in person, certifications earned one by one. Each small victory filed away without ceremony. When Thomas noticed the books, he laughed. Not cruelly, casually. The way people laughed at ideas they didn't intend to take seriously. "You're reinventing yourself now?" he'd asked once, already distracted by his phone. "I'm learning," she'd replied, calm as always. He never asked what it cost her. The weekends away. The exams retaken. The long stretches of doubt when she wondered if she was foolish for starting so late, for choosing something so demanding when no one was cheering. She learned to trust silence. See, Laura found clarity. The rules were precise. The expectations unforgiving. Authority wasn't given, it was proven day after day. She thrived there, earning respect not through force but through competence. Through decisions that held when pressure rose. By the time she stood on the bridge in full command, the uniform fit like truth. She didn't think about Thomas then. She didn't need to. The ocean had become her measure. When she reviewed the passenger manifest, she didn't react the way people imagined she would. No anger. No shock. Just recognition. Thomas Kingston. Confirmation, not surprise. She understood him better than he understood himself. Understood the lie he'd told himself about freedom. Understood that he would mistake her silence for ignorance, her steadiness for absence. Laura didn't change course. Didn't seek confrontation. She didn't need to. Reinvention, she knew, wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about no longer needing their approval. As the ship cut forward through open water, Laura gave her orders with calm precision. Crew members responded instantly. The vessel moved exactly as intended. She stood at the helm, composed, complete. And somewhere below, Thomas began to understand the cost of ignoring a woman who had learned how to command her own direction. The change in the air came before the clouds. Thomas felt it on the upper deck, a subtle pressure that made the breeze sharper and the sunlight duller. Around him, passengers laughed and lounged, unaware of the quiet shift unfolding above their heads. Crew members, however, moved with purpose, securing railings, folding towels, speaking in clipped tones that carried urgency without panic. Mia waved it off. "Looks dramatic," she said, leaning into the wind. "I love it." Thomas didn't answer. His eyes kept drifting upward, toward the bridge he now avoided instinctively. Every announcement, every distant footstep felt loaded. He imagined Laura there, steady hands, focused gaze, reading the sky the way she read everything else. Prepared. Unmoved. The first announcement came softly. Advisories. Polite requests to remain indoors after dusk. Nothing alarming. Still, his stomach tightened. By evening, the sea had grown restless. Waves struck the hull with a hollow insistence, rattling glass and nerves alike. The ship remained smooth, engineered for worse than this, but the illusion of leisure cracked. The lounge music lowered. Conversations thinned. The ocean began to feel like a presence rather than a backdrop. In the suite, Mia paced. "You're acting strange," she said. "It's just weather." Thomas poured a drink he didn't finish. "Stay away from the balcony," he said, sharper than intended. She stared at him. "Why are you suddenly afraid?" "I'm not," he replied, though the lie felt thin. He wasn't afraid of the storm. He was afraid of what it revealed. How small control felt when tested, how exposed he was when there was nowhere to disembark. Outside, the wind rose. The ship groaned and held. Lights swayed gently, then steadied. Somewhere overhead, Laura's voice cut through the noise. Measured, clear, reassuring. Instructions followed. The kind that didn't invite debate. Thomas listened from the bed, counting the seconds between waves, feeling the truth press in with each impact. The storm didn't frighten him because it was dangerous. It frightened him because it was handled so well without him. As the ship pushed forward, unyielding and precise, Thomas understood the parallel too clearly to ignore. The storm outside would pass. The chaos inside him would not. The invitation arrived just before sunset, embossed and formal, slipped beneath the door like a verdict. Mia was delighted. "The captain's table," she read aloud, eyes shining. "That's exclusive. You said you wanted the full experience." Thomas nodded, though his pulse had already begun to climb. The words felt heavier than they should have. Captain's table. Public. Blows. Inevitable. That night, the dining room glowed with soft light and quiet prestige. Crystal caught the chandeliers. Conversations hovered at a respectful murmur. When Laura entered, the room shifted. Not dramatically, not audibly, but unmistakably. She wore her uniform with ease, the insignia catching the light without demanding it. Authority sat on her like second skin. Thomas stood too late, sat too quickly. Mia leaned forward, smiling. "Captain Kingston," she said brightly, "this ship is incredible." "Thank you," Laura replied, composed. Her gaze moved across the table, paused for a fraction of a second at Thomas, then continued on. "Professional, polite, unrevealing." The restraint cut deeper than anger ever could. Dinner unfolded in careful layers. Wine poured. Courses arrived. Questions were asked of Laura, about the route, the weather, the vessel itself. She answered with precision and grace, never raising her voice, never glancing back at Thomas longer than courtesy allowed. When laughter rippled across the table, Thomas felt out of step, like he was speaking half a second behind the world. Every clink of silverware sounded amplified. Every pause felt intentional. At one point Mia laughed and said, "You must be intimidating in command." Laura smiled, small and measured. "Consistency does most of the work." Her eyes met Thomas's then, clear, calm, unwavering. He lowered his gaze first. There was no accusation in the moment. No exposure. Just proximity. Just the quiet understanding that she saw him exactly as he was, and that it no longer required her response. When dinner ended, Laura rose smoothly. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," she said to the table, already turning away. Thomas watched her leave, the space she created widening behind her. Publicly, nothing had happened. Privately, everything had. Silence followed Thomas everywhere after that. Not the absence of sound. The ship was full of it, but the deliberate quiet Laura left in her wake. She didn't summon him. Didn't corner him. Didn't even acknowledge the tension she had drawn so precisely into being. Announcements continued as usual. Come updates. Polite reassurances. Her voice steady as the horizon. Each time it carried through the corridors, Thomas felt it settle into him like weight. Mia noticed first. "She hasn't said anything to you," she said one afternoon, watching the sea from the railing. "Not even a look. That's strange, isn't it?" Thomas shrugged too quickly. "Why would she?" Mia studied him. "Because people don't ignore what doesn't matter." That was the cruelty of it. Laura hadn't made a scene because she didn't need one. She hadn't demanded answers because she already had them. Her silence wasn't avoidance. It was certainty. Thomas found himself watching her from a distance. On the bridge through glass. Crossing the deck with officers who deferred without question. The crew moved around her with an ease born of trust. She belonged here. Completely. At night, he lay awake beside Mia, listening to the engine's hum, replaying every moment he'd dismissed her dreams. Every laugh. Every interruption. Every time he'd assumed she would stay where he left her. The ship continued its journey, flawless in its execution. Laura never blocked his path. Never acknowledged the history between them. When they passed in public spaces, her nod was polite, impersonal, the kind reserved for strangers. That was the punishment. Not humiliation. Not exposure. Erasure. Thomas realized too late that confrontation would have been easier. Anger could be argued with. Tears could be manipulated. Silence offered no entry point. She had moved beyond him. And in doing so, she stripped him of the last thing he thought he still controlled, the narrative. The ship sailed on unchanged. Laura commanded without looking back. And Thomas learned that sometimes the most devastating power is exercised by those who no longer need to speak at all. The final days of the voyage arrived without ceremony. The sea had softened again, the horizon calm and expansive, as if nothing beneath it had ever churned. Passengers returned to routines, sun loungers, laughter, plans for what came next. The ship moved forward with unwavering purpose. So did Laura. Thomas saw her one last time on the morning the ship prepared to dock. She stood on the bridge, sunlight catching the edge of her uniform, gaze fixed ahead. There was no hesitation in her posture, no weight pulling her backward. Whatever she had carried into this journey, she was no longer holding it. He waited for something, An announcement, a glance, a sign that this had meant something to her too. Nothing came. Mia packed noisily behind him, talking about flights and dinners and stories they would tell when they got home. Thomas answered when required, his voice distant, his attention fixed on the slow closing of a chapter he had never thought to read to the end. As the ship eased into port, Laura's final address sounded through the speakers. It was brief, professional, gracious. She thanked the passengers, the crew, the sea itself. She did not say his name. Thomas stood at the railing, watching the land rise to meet them, feeling the quiet settle into permanence. He understood now what freedom actually cost, and how easily it could be mistaken for escape. Laura didn't wait for him on the dock. She disembarked with the crew, already moving into the next horizon, her future aligned with direction rather than regret. She had chosen herself without spectacle, without apology. The ship emptied around him. Thomas remained aboard a moment longer than necessary, standing in a space that no longer belonged to him. Everything he had brought with him, confidence, control, certainty, felt misplaced now, like luggage left behind in the wrong cabin. When he finally stepped onto solid ground, the ship was already preparing to leave again. Didn't look back. Neither did Laura. And Thomas, still carrying the weight of what he'd lost, realized too late that some journeys end not with confrontation, but with the quiet knowledge that the world moves on without you.